Hi, everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Malin Pereira, Dean of the Honors College at UNC Charlotte. I'm very excited to welcome you all to this celebration of our third annual Dean's Prize for Best Honors Capstone Thesis or Project. Thanks so much for attending this important event. And of course, many, many congratulations to our winners, Foster Duckworth, Mia Huffman, Anna Kristanovic, and Tashana Wilkins. This ceremony is being recorded. So the Dean's Prize recognizes outstanding honors inquiry, and we want to highlight this work as a model of academic excellence and honors. Our four recipients and their work will be featured in university publications, on the Honors College website, and social media posts, and available through the library's public repository of student work, Niner Commons. Note to the winners, in case you forgot to do that, please do. Each will receive $500 thanks to our generous donors. Special thanks to the Committee of Honors faculty who selected these capstone, Lance Barton, Jim Frakes, and Jacqueline Pietak, from 15 outstanding nominations from honors program directors, as well as thanks to the honors faculty who mentored these students so well. Next, we're going to hear from each recipient an overview of their capstone work, followed by a few minutes of Q&A. That's where all of you come in. We will then close the ceremony by highlighting our donors, without whom these prizes would not be possible. So presenters, just a reminder, I'm going to run a 5-minute timer on your presentation on my phone. I'm really sorry, but it's the only way that I can keep track of it. And I will raise my hand as a 2-minute warning. And then I will also run that timer for when we have the Q&A, so we don't go over 5 minutes, because it's always terrible to be the last presenter, and we don't want them to have no time. So everybody good with that? Excellent. Okay. Presenter number 1 is Foster Duckworth. And I believe everybody has the capacity to share their screen, so I will not hit the timer till I see your screen. How's that? Yeah, and I think you then can start the slideshow and it'll be all the right size. There you go.
Well, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Foster Duckworth. I'm a history and Japanese studies double major and a rising senior at UNC Charlotte. And today I'll be sharing with you my history honors thesis titled Indigenous Inspirations, the Role of Alcohol and Western Notions of Indigeneity in Japanese Colonialism and Ainu Life in Hokkaido from 1869 to 1899. So before I really get into my thesis, I need to explain a little bit of background because most people don't know where Hokkaido is or who the Ainu even are. So I'll direct you to this map on the side. Hokkaido is the northernmost island of Japan, and it still is to this day. And the Ainu are the indigenous inhabitants of northern Japan, as well as some modern-day Russian territories like Sakhalin here and the Kuril Islands here. The most important thing you need to know is that the Japanese and the Ainu have interacted as independent autonomous entities for over 9 centuries. But steadily over time, the Japanese began to encroach more and more into Hokkaido's territory and the Ainu economy. So by 1868, with the Meiji Restoration, the whole of Japan was on its effort to modernize its industries in accordance to Western standards. And with that came efforts to integrate Hokkaido wholly into the Japanese country. And that came in the form of the Hokkaido Development Commission. The first commissioner of the commission decided that in order to do so, he would invite American foreign employees to give advice on how to best colonize Hokkaido for our American expertise in colonization. This occurred for about 30 years until 1899 with the Hokkaido Former Aborigines Act, which effectively stripped the Ainu of their indigenous and Aboriginal label and instead relegated them to being former Aborigines, as the name suggests, and had the role of Japanese commoners. And with it came the restriction of Ainu language and cultural practices. And unfortunately, it had so much success that today the Ainu are still fully assimilated into the Japanese population. For my thesis specifically, I wanted to focus on the primary sources that I worked with, and they can kind of be categorized into 3 main areas. One of which is American members of the Hokkaido Development Commission. 2 is Horace Capron, who is very specific to my thesis and very essential. And then 3 other Western visitors to Hokkaido. I want to draw your attention specifically to Horace Capron because he is kind of the conduit through which my comparative analysis was performed, because he's the only member of the Hokkaido Development Commission that had a career in the United States before going to Hokkaido, in which he was a special Indian agent responsible for removing American or Native American tribes in Texas. And so throughout his memoirs, what really stood out to me was the way that he interacted with and identified the whiskey Indian stereotype in the United States, and how this kind of contrasted with the ways he discussed the Ainu, even though he attributed a lot of the same traits to them. The role of alcohol in the economic relationship that he witnessed between the Ainu and the Japanese was very, very different. And so throughout my thesis, I kind of applied these questions based on what I saw in Horst and a lot of similarities that I found in these other sources about Ainu drinking culture and impressions of Ainu drinking culture. So one, I asked myself, how is Ainu culture and demeanor conceptualized by each of these individuals? Um, Two, how are Ainu drinking habits described? Are they positive or negative? And in what context are they being described? And three, how do these impressions differ from or relate to Western stereotypes like the whiskey Indian regarding Native Americans and their drinking habits? So this brings me kind of to my ultimate conclusion and my big final statement that kind of summarizes it, which is unlike in the United States, where alcoholism was seen as one of the worst aspects of civilized life and signified an acceptance of white vice, American advisors associated Ainu dependency on sake with established colonial control by the Japanese, and thus as a gateway to smoother assimilation into the Japanese polity. This can kind of be boiled down into four main topics that I discuss in my thesis, which is one, that the Ainu were seen as both good Indians and whiskey Indians according to Western stereotypes, which is kind of unprecedented because whiskey Indians fall under the umbrella of bad Indians. So the fact that the Ainu can occupy both of these stereotypes at the same time was very interesting to me. Two is that sake was used as a colonial control very overtly by American foreign advisors based on some primary sources that suggest that this had roots in with Japanese merchants earlier in earlier centuries, and that this colonial tool had roots in the Ainu-Japanese trade relationship and the steady incorporation of the Ainu into the Japanese economy. And finally, alcohol and its consumption as a marker of proximity to civilization took on a positive meaning in Hokkaido that it never achieved in the American West. So with that, that's all I have for you today, and I'm open to any questions. Thank you for listening.
Awesome job. 30 seconds to spare. So let's open the floor to questions. And I see Lance has the first hand up. And then I see Gretchen Bagley has a hand up. And I'll keep looking. Lance? Dr. Barton?
I was actually just giving applause. Foster, you did a really great job of summarizing, having read that and really gotten engrossed in your text. You did a really nice job of summarizing that there and presenting that. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Barton. Yes, comments are also welcome, not just questions. Mrs. Bagley, did you have a comment or a question?
I was giving applause as well.
Applause. So I'm clearly misreading the little signals here. Question. So I'll have a question. So Foster, one of the things that I think is distinctive is, as you say, something that's seen as negative in the West, but seen as positive in Japanese culture, as sake, drinking alcohol. Can you explain why Japanese culture? I mean, I think I'm familiar with like the Americans and the Pilgrims and, all the, yeah, things against alcohol in the US. But can you just expand a little bit on the whole issue with Japanese?
Absolutely. For drinking sake specifically in Japan, it tends to have a kind of economic business connotation. It still kind of does today. But with the Ainu in particular, a lot of these rituals that they would perform in trade relationships kind of happened and were kind of facilitated by drinking sake amicably with one another. And then there's also this whole issue is that within the Ainu trade, sake became a very important aspect of Ainu religious practices as well. So there was kind of this dependence on alcohol in Ainu culture that was only able to be facilitated by interaction with the Japanese. So they kind of got stuck together in a very detrimental way. But so that's kind of where that positive connotation comes from, is that in some of the primary sources I read, these men were seeing these economic rituals in which sake was being drank and kind of viewed it as a marker of civility of like this is what's facilitating these interactions and this like civilized economic interaction. So I kind of generalized it a bit, but I hope that makes sense.
Oh, makes total sense. Religion as a conduit to drinking sake.
Mhm.
Yes. And I believe Dean Boyer had his hand up, and I've also been told Abby had her hand up. Thanks to my team for helping me because I can't see everybody's face. Dean Boyer.
So, congratulations on this project. I guess I would be a little bit interested in a touch more detail in whether to or to what extent the American officials made explicit comparisons with U.S. Native people. And if so, did they just sort of talk about Native people generally, or did they have specific specific peoples in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. That was also one big thing that I struggled with in my thesis is how much that these men generalized the experiences of the indigenous people that they had interacted with or knew stereotypes of. So Horace Capron in particular, because he did interact with them, he at one point provides a huge list of the tribes that he removed, but when he's discussing Native American demeanor, it's very generalized, obviously, savage, unruly, uncivilized, everything that you would think of as a very obvious stereotype. Um, and in the writings of these other men, the kind of the same lines were followed of like, well, they're not as savage, or the Ainu are not as savage as Native Americans. So it was kind of like comparing that kind of potential for civilization and assimilation to one another. But what I noticed is that very obviously Native Americans were disdained among all of them, and that the Ainu were kind of just seen as like a better version of it. So.
Interesting. Professor Moore, did you have a question too? And we're coming up on the 2-minute mark, so you both are going to need to be quicker.
Okay, so you'll probably not be surprised by my question, but well done, Foster. I'm just wondering, you mentioned primary research, primary sources and that type of research. I'm wondering how you were able to access these primary sources and why perhaps these were the best types of resources to kind of pursue this line of questioning in your research.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I am a Japanese studies major, but I'm just now reaching the point where I could actually like work with Japanese texts. But during this thesis, one, I didn't have the time because I'm still not great at it. So I had to go the route of working with the English sources, which was really difficult in its own right, and my topic changed a little bit. But I mostly found them through this very weird connection that a university, Hokkaido University has with UMass Amherst here is that a lot of professors who used to work at UMass Amherst came over to Hokkaido, established the agricultural college there. And so almost all of the English records are at UMass Amherst. So I spent a lot of time emailing them, but a lot of just like wild goose chases of like who would have the English for this. And it led me to a lot of really interesting areas. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, leave it to the librarian to want to know. So very cool. Any last questions? We have 48 seconds. Nope. Okay, well, applause to Foster, and we will move on to our next presenter. This is fascinating. Our next presenter is going to be Mia Huffman. Hi, Mia. Haven't seen you in a bit. So Mia is going to present for 5 minutes. I'll raise my hand at 2, et cetera, et cetera. So Mia, take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So my name is Mia Huffman. I'm a now recent graduate of UNC Charlotte with a degree in criminal justice and sociology. And this is my honors thesis in criminal justice, the effects of social support on prisoner reentry outcomes in emerging adulthood. So starting with background, the United States accounts for around 20% of the global prison population. Most incarcerated individuals in the US will eventually be released. However, a high rate of these individuals will end up being rearrested or reincarcerated later on, which demonstrates how the criminal justice system fails to adequately support individuals in the process of reentering society. With young adults who experience incarceration, the reentry process can be even more challenging due to significant life transitions, diminished conventional opportunities, and a lack of natural social support that accompanies a traditional transition to adulthood. And so a comprehensive understanding of what constitutes successful reentry among these individuals is the key to reducing recidivism rates and encouraging offender rehabilitation. There are 3 key concepts within my capstone, which I'll give a very high level overview of. First, emerging adulthood is a term which defines a transitional period that individuals ages 18 to 25 experience. And this is argued to be distinct as individuals have left the dependency of adolescence, but have not yet fully progressed to the responsibilities of adulthood. Emerging adulthood is also a crucial period within criminology as individuals experience heightened risk-taking due to the instability of this period. And this results in an overrepresentation of emerging adults in the justice system. With social support, this study uses a criminological theory called social control theory as a framework for defining social support. Travis Hershey's theory examines how social support can prevent individuals from criminal involvement. And he argues that the stronger one's social bonds are, the more one is able to resist the urge to commit crime. Additionally, many studies on crime have found that certain social factors, such as strong familial attachment, non-delinquent friendships, marriage and parenthood, are all associated with lower levels of offending. Finally, prisoner reentry is the process by which individuals are released from incarceration and reintegrate into the community. Prisoner reentry programming is essential for individuals to successfully reintegrate into the community, and is especially important for this emerging adult population as they're particularly vulnerable. Reentry outcomes can be defined by a wide variety of different factors, but for the purpose of this study, I will be referring to recidivism rates, which are typically the rearrest or reincarceration of individuals following release from prison. So my capstone project ultimately examines the relationship between these three concepts, aiming to offer factors that predict successful prisoner reentry and contribute to broader literature that hopefully informs criminal justice policy and practices. And the two research questions that guided this are individuals aged 18 to 25 more likely to experience rearrest and or reincarceration? And do people who report higher levels of social support experience lower rates of rearrest and or reincarceration? For the findings, starting with question 1, emerging adults were found to be significantly more likely to experience both rearrest and reincarceration compared to those 26 and over. And this result was supported even when controlling for other factors related to recidivism, such as race, education, having children, or being married. With question 2, social support was found to be statistically significant in predicting rearrest, though not significant in predicting reincarceration for these individuals. One possible explanation for this outcome is that criminal offenses do not always escalate to incarceration. However, charge was not examined in this study, so future research would benefit from investigating this finding more. And to conclude, the interesting thing about this population is that these individuals have already served time in prison by the time they are no older than 25. And so it's clear that they're a high-risk group and that they have an additional need for social support in the reentry process. Criminal justice policy and practice can be bolstered by offering opportunities for social support both in prison and in reentry programming. And agencies should also offer training to staff, such as parole officers, to promote strategies that will provide additional support and resources. And ultimately, targeted services should be dedicated to this emerging adulthood group to interrupt their criminal career and restore a life of convention. And yeah, that's all I had. Thank you guys.
Four seconds to spare. Excellent job. And I'm correctly reading who is clapping and who is not. So, so questions for Mia. I'll give you a chance to find your raise hand button. Now, Shelley moved her hand. I don't know if that's
Sorry, I was like trying to find my buttons on my screen. I happened to be on my phone. So great job, Mia. That was fantastic. One question and a comment, I guess, as it is, could you speak a little bit more about this emerging adulthood group that you looked at, which you said is 18 to 24?
Mhm.
They already spent time in prison because you mentioned this group is people who were released into halfway houses. Is that right? Can you talk a little bit more about kind of where these are pretty risky group of individuals and why that's important?
Mhm. Yeah, so the sample, the data came from recently released adult male inmates who served time in Ohio prisons and, like you said, were placed in Ohio halfway houses. And so the full sample was not all emerging adults. They made up about 20% of the sample. Um, and one of the variables that we looked at was whether these individuals had prior prison experience as well. So that was an added factor where a significant amount of them, even the emerging adults, about 40% of them had prior prison experience at the time of the study being conducted. So that means that they had experienced incarceration at least twice by the time they were no older than 25. And so that's an added challenge for this group. And as I spoke about the emerging adulthood group, that being kind of this transitional life period where you take on a lot of new responsibilities and a lot of new experiences are happening. And these individuals were missing that during the time that they were incarcerated. Um, and so that was a significant factor with the sample that we looked at, and especially that emerging adult population.
Great. Any other questions? If not, I have a question, but I'll wait to defer to our group. Okay, I'll just hog the floor then. So actually, my brother has worked in social services his entire career. And his current position involves him actually calling and contacting people who've just been released from prison. And so one of the things he says is that it's actually incredibly hard to get a hold of these folks. So his job is to then refer them to support services. And so do you know, sort of related to this, like the rate of accepting support services when they are offered? Because he's in the triangle and apparently they have pretty good, well, at least they try.
Yeah. Yeah, so the specific like number or rate of that I don't have, but it is true that they are hard to get in touch with, especially in a research context, which can make it difficult to find support for things like whether we need additional reentry services or specific programming and things like that. I think the rate of acceptance, a lot of it is dependent on the region and where specifically the individuals are. I think a lot of reentry programming differs a lot depending on the specific prison and even the specific individual. But I think that would be interesting to look a little bit more into that and see if there is more data on that. But that's one of the things that I'm hoping to address in this research and future research is are there certain programs that are really widely beneficial and take as much of a holistic approach as possible for each individual to help them, to help rehabilitate them and help them in the reentry process.
Yeah, I think kind of step one would be just having consistent access to a cell phone and cell phone service, because sometimes yeah, that's the problem. Great. Any other questions? We've got a minute if anybody has one. Okay, as far as I can tell, I see nobody moving. Let's all congratulate Mia again. And very good job. Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So now we'll move on to Anna. Or do you prefer Anna?
It's Anna. Thank you.
Good. Hey, nailed it. Okay. Not sure I did so well on the last name. Kristanovic?
Kristanovic.
Oh, substitute. Okay, got it. So, your turn now.
Okay. Okay. Can you guys see my screen? Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Anna Kristanovic, and today I'll be presenting my thesis project, which is the public perception of reproductive rights following the Dobbs v. Jackson decision. So first, I'll go over the literature review and the methods, then I'll get into the results, and finally, I'll go into the discussion. So in 1973, Roe v. Wade established the constitutional right to an abortion in the United States. But in 2022, that was reversed by Dobbs v. Jackson. Abortion bans were then left up to the states to implement, and as of June 2025, there are currently 19 states with abortion restrictions. And what that means essentially is that 19 states now ban abortion or restrict abortion in earlier stages of pregnancy than set by Roe v. Wade. Now, to this day, birth control access and contraceptive access is limited for many people, and organizations that try to provide family planning services, like Planned Parenthood, are facing challenges in their day-to-day operations. Broadcast news media coverage, according to the agenda setting theory, has the ability to persuade and influence the way that people perceive things. And in the media coverage that has been studied, there have been two general themes: the prominence of certain voices and the framing. So, in terms of framing, abortion debate has always been framed politically as opposed to a healthcare issue. And the prominence of certain voices, women and healthcare professionals are rarely featured in the discussion about reproductive health. One study even found that health professionals were featured 4% of the time, as opposed to religious figures, which were featured 40% of the time. Essentially, my thesis aims to investigate the informational, societal, and educational gaps that broadcast news media coverage has created in regards to reproductive health. So to do this, I conducted a content analysis of news media coverage in the 3-month time period following Dobbs v. Jackson. There were 18 transcripts, 9 were pulled from MSNBC, which represented the liberal side, and 9 were pulled from Fox News, which represented the conservative side. Now, 5 variables were used to analyze these transcripts, and they are as follows: language and word choice, guests, framing style, appeal style, and news segment length. Now, the results of this were very interesting. So, more men were featured than women on these shows. Journalists were the predominant guest type, followed shortly after by political figures. Only one guest featured was a healthcare professional in the span of 18 shows. Those were the words used more by Fox News, and those were the words used more by MSNBC. In terms of framing, there were a small minority of shows that were framed for or coded for healthcare framing, and the other ones were framed for political framing. And then in terms of appeal, it was predominantly an emotional appeal for both networks. And these are a bit deeper results. So we have the guests on the left-hand side and the word count on the right-hand side. All right, so here is the discussion. In terms of guests, as I mentioned before, there were a lot more men featured than women. No one who has given birth or had an abortion was featured in the span of 18 shows. There was one healthcare professional also featured in that same span of 18 shows. And that can potentially be problematic because the public receives a skewed perception of reproductive health, and there's the absence of vulnerability and personal relation when it comes to a medical procedure. Additionally, the framing was predominantly political, and once again, because of that, the general public receives political language and misses out on factual, clear, concise rhetoric, specifically in regards to reproductive health. Now, the language and word choice used was incredibly divisive. MSNBC used left-leaning rhetoric, while Fox used right-leaning rhetoric. And it's important to note that previous studies found that word and phrasing choices significantly impacted aggregate levels of support for policies. So the fact that this is happening is worrisome. Now, the appeal was predominantly emotional. It seemed as if for both networks, connecting with the audience in their political belief was more important than providing the audience with concrete and factual information about a medical procedure. Going forward, I would love to see the fact that women's voices are amplified, that healthcare professional voices are amplified, and that the politics are taken out of it, and it's mostly a healthcare discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna. So we have time for questions. Anybody want to raise their hand in any way that I can perceive? That would be great. I see Vaughn. Professor Schmutz.
Hey Anna, great presentation. I just had a question about was there a difference in the gender distribution across the networks on those shows and who were guests? I know it was over men were overrepresented, but didn't know if that varied at all across the networks.
No, it was pretty much evenly distributed that men were predominant over women in those representations and in those populations. Neither network seemed to be striving in that sector more than the other. It was a pretty clear thing across the board. So.
Any other questions? I see Aaron Bassinger. Basinger, maybe.
I'm a little bit of a plant, I guess, because I was on as advisor on this project. So since I know the answer to this and think it's interesting, could you talk about what you're doing now with this project?
Yes, so Dr. Basinger has been so wonderful to continue working on this project with me, and we are expanding it to get a bigger sample size. One of the limitations in this project was the fact that it was a relatively small sample size and that the networks were constricted to MSNBC and Fox. But now we're working throughout the summer to expand that to more shows, get a more concise time period so that we get more data and can find statistical significance, because a lot of our findings were almost statistically significant, and we believe that if we were to have a larger database, we'd be able to find that significance.
Excellent. Other opportunities for questions? So I guess I'll play my role of.
I was actually going to.
Oh, good. Dean Boyer, you go.
That's okay. So congratulations on this work. I did have one question about your methods. How did you select the specific? I presume it's eight shows for each network, but I was wondering how you chose the specific broadcast that you did, and if you had a time delimitation. It made me wonder a little bit about if there were, obviously there's going to be a lot of news about the finding itself, but if there were any other events that triggered the reports.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that question. So actually, this was very interesting because we, at the beginning, went solely based off of availability to the public. And that was why these specific shows were chosen. So I chose a weeknight show from MSNBC and a daytime show from Fox News solely because of the public availability. Now, I did list that as a limitation because that does mean that those narratives could potentially be different because their show airings and their time airings are different. But going forward, I would absolutely love to have a consistent string of shows in their timeline. That way I can just make sure that the comparisons are completely accurate in terms of time, airing, and show sequence. So that's kind of what the process was for that.
I think maybe Dean Pereira froze. I just a really quick question to see if we can get Dean Pereira back with us. You were focused on shows that were on TV. Would you also look at things like podcasts or things that might not be driven by advertisement revenue for also having an impact in this particular area?
Absolutely. Those things would be very interesting to study. This thesis was solely guided by agenda setting theory in the sense that broadcast news media coverage has the ability to influence and persuade people, which is why network shows were chosen. But in terms of the impact that things like podcasts and social media have. It's extensive and it's tremendous. And I think that would be incredible to look at and see the results of. So yeah, I would absolutely love to. Just for this thesis project, it was kind of constricted to broadcast news. Yes.
I can see that even though Zoom kicked me off, everybody survived without me. So that's great. Cool. Thank you, Anna. Let's give her another round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
And hopefully I'll make it through the last one. Tashana Wilkins will present now, and I'll give you a warning at 2-minute warning, and then we'll have Q&A for Tashana.
Okay, can you see my screen? Is that a yes? I can't hear. I can't see you.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All right, so I'm going to be presenting my research on arts participation and future outlook among youth of color. So that's kind of the start of my research question. I wanted to see, how does arts participation with youth of color impact their future outlook? So this topic is important for a few different reasons. Youth of color experience many historical disadvantages, and although policy and legislation are incredibly important in overcoming these disadvantages, I want to see if arts participation may help break down some of these generational barriers. There's also limited research on youth of color and their perspectives. Most of research that focuses on the benefits of arts asks the parents or the teachers, but not really the youth themselves. So I kind of started with developing this term, future outlook, which refers to the perception that one has of their time ahead and any expectations they may have about what they can accomplish. And through my literature review, I kind of wanted to pull out two kind of categories to really kind of expand on what future outlook means. And I found two categories: concrete benefits and social emotional benefits. The concrete benefits are the ones that you typically think of as the potential benefits of arts participation, all things related to career and college aspirations and readiness. So these are arts learning skills, business learning skills, experience, college, career, and cognitive ability. There's also the social emotional benefits, which are just as important as the concrete benefits. And those are things like self-efficacy, which is like confidence, self-expression, and emotional well-being. For my research design, I did semi-structured interviews with 15 students aged 10 to 18 years old. I also did participant observation. I took about 38 hours worth of field notes, and I interviewed and observed students at the Harvey B. Gantt Center's Youth Residency, which is a cohort-based arts program for high school students, and through after-school arts clubs through Lorraine Academy of the Arts, which is a nonprofit that provides funding for Title I schools to have after-school arts activities. And I interviewed students at the Visual Arts Club at Governor's Village STEM Academy and the Theater and Creative Writing Club at Julius L. Chambers High School. So after reviewing my interviews and my observations, I found that career was overall the most well-mentioned aspect of future outlook. Many of the students could articulate why they wanted to pursue their arts careers, and if they didn't want to pursue an arts career, they could articulate how they could use certain art skills in maybe like a high stress job as stress relief, or for design, one mentioned having their own vet's office so they could use their art as design. The most mentioned social emotional benefit of future outlook was self-efficacy. Many of the students talked about how confident they were after being in their clubs, and they stressed how important their teachers were in instilling that confidence in them. There's also the issues of barriers that I found through the research. Many of the students had issues with reliable transportation. Some of them even had to wait until they could drive themselves to school before they could participate in an after-school arts activity, which is incredibly disappointing for them. And Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system does not have an after-school activity bus like a comparable county, Wake County. There's also the issue of the lack of arts investments. Many of the students felt like their schools either did not care about the arts at all or place sports over them. Some of the students even had their plays shut down last minute just for a sports event. There was also the issue, the lack of diversity, equity, inclusion that still persists in a lot of art spaces. Specifically, the theater students at Chambers High School had a theater competition where they felt ostracized throughout the whole event and like they did not fit the target audience of the competition. So that leads me to my conclusions. This project had a lot of implications for expanding access to the arts. There needs to be more funding into transportation programs, investing in the arts at the same capacity as other hobbies and pursuits, and also making sure that art spaces are designed with everyone in mind. There also needs to make sure that there are intentional program design. When people are sitting down to create these types of arts programs, they need to make sure that they are building skills and competencies in the program that they want their students to walk away with and that they want their students to be able to develop in their future. Future research can look towards doing a longitudinal design, kind of understanding if the students' sentiments have changed or if their sentiments actually match what they end up pursuing. Looking at a larger sample size and also potentially a comparative analysis, maybe between different modes of art or also between different clubs and everything along those lines. And that is it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tashana. 24 seconds to spare. So, and I see all the applause. So, any questions for Tashana? I guess it's
a question.
Oh, good. Thank you, Denise. Otherwise, it's Dr. P again. So,
No, my children both went to a high school where they were both involved in the arts with music and theater and that sort of thing. But the football program at this particular high school was very advanced and they had won state championships and that sort of thing. So when you talked about that impact that some students in the arts have, feeling that they are secondary citizens because the sporting events take precedence. Do you have any, based on the conversations that you had, did you talk to any administrators or anybody about ways in which to have more parity in each of those things, not to minimize one over the other in either direction?
Yeah, I definitely had some like conversations, especially with like the instructors at the club, and just their conversations with like how even some of the students balance, because some of the students were also involved in band, which is heavily related to sports, and there was like that balance of like, what do I do when? And honestly, the air is kind of it's hard for them right now, especially with like the recent federal stuff. And they're worried about funding. And a lot of times they see sports as like a way to draw in funding. So right now they don't really have an idea of like how to make it balance, but programs like Lorraine Academy of the Arts and being able to provide funding to at least have the clubs in general right now is a step in the right direction, but they're kind of trying to get their footing right now with even just their educational programs. So it's a little difficult in this time.
great. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, I think I have one. You may be aware that in the college or university space, we have a lot more pressure on us to justify our majors and even our research in terms of a student's career, the careerism thing. So I wonder how much you might have heard any of that be trickling down to, the groups rather that you're looking at. Like, did anybody seem to feel they were wasting their time because this wasn't directly related to their future career in X, Y, Z, or Q? Curious.
For the most part, I will say some of the older students and one group with the Gantt Center, they were very like confident in what they were doing. They had like little to no doubts about pursuing their careers in the arts. I did have a couple of students I talked with who talked about how they did kind of doubt what they were doing, specifically with pursuing a career in writing. And they were talking about how, I know, but they said that they had good conversations with either their teachers or they went to like a field trip at the Blumenthal and talked to a few writers there and how they kind of instilled them with the confidence of like, well, I'm where I am and you can keep pursuing that. There were some students who like didn't want to pursue a career in the arts for that kind of reason of like not being like kind of figuring out how to make it work. But through their clubs and conversations, I was able to see like towards the end, they were kind of able to put the pieces together of like what I need to do to make this an actual career if they wanted to do that.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
We have a minute if anybody else wants to ask a question of Tashana. Okay, well, let's give some applause to Tashana. Great
Thank
job.
you.
So let me wrap things up for everybody. I want to point out that these awards would not have been possible without the support of three longtime friends of the Honors College, including Harry Creamers and Delbridge Naron. And additional contributions were made to the Honors College Endowed Fund during Niner Nation Gives. So we are really appreciative of those donors and their support for these Honors Capstones. So many thanks, friends, especially if you view the recording. Again, let's congratulate the recipients, Foster Duckworth, Mia Huffman, Anna Kristanovich, Tashana Wilkins, and their faculty mentors and program directors, and the selection committee for their excellent choices. Thanks for attending, everyone, and have a really great day.